What's the one food that tastes like home? What's the one dish that can instantly transport you back to your childhood kitchen, to the sound of your mother's voice, to a feeling of safety and belonging? For most of us, there's an answer. It might be a soup, a specific brand of cookie, or a holiday meal. It's more than just food. It's a memory you can taste, a story you can eat. For author and musician Michelle Zauner, that food was Korean food, and her relationship with it was deeply complicated. It was the primary language of her mother's often difficult love. It was a fragile bridge to a culture she barely knew, and after her mother's death, it became the only thing that could bring her back. Michelle Zauner's memoir, Crying in H Mart, is a raw, heartbreaking, and ultimately beautiful exploration of one of life's most painful experiences, losing a mother. But it's also a profound story about how the simple, everyday things, like a bowl of noodles, a jar of kimchi, or the aisles of a grocery store, become the sacred vessels that hold our most precious memories, our deepest identities, and the people we never, ever want to forget. To understand this book, you have to understand that the relationship between Michelle and her mother, Chong-mi, was often a turbulent one. Michelle was the rebellious, artistic, Americanized daughter, chasing her dreams of being in a rock band. Chong-mi was the tough, critical, and often inscrutable Korean mother who had sacrificed her own life and soul to raise a family in a small town in Oregon. Their personalities were like oil and water, leading to explosive fights over everything from Michelle's report cards to her makeup choices, often followed by long periods of cold, tense silence. Overt affection was rare. The words "I love you" were not a common currency in their household. They were a special occasion, a rarity to be treasured. Instead, their deep, fierce, and often unspoken bond was forged and communicated through a different, more elemental language, the language of food. Love was her mother meticulously peeling a pear for her after dinner, handing her the crisp, sweet slices. Love was her mother waking up at the crack of dawn to make her a complex seaweed soup for her birthday, a tradition steeped in Korean culture. Love was a Tupperware container of meticulously prepared side dishes, or banchan, sent with her on a road trip, a silent offering of care. It was in these small, consistent acts of service, all centered around the intricate and beautiful traditions of Korean cuisine, that their bond was truly expressed. Her mother would show her how to properly wash rice until the water ran clear, how to tell if a melon was ripe just by the sound it made when you thumped it. These were not just chores, they were lessons in care, in quality, in a specific way of being in the world. But food was also a battleground. It was often the source of her mother's harshest criticisms. "You're not eating enough. You're eating too much. You don't appreciate the good food I make for you." For Michelle, pleasing her mother often felt like an impossible, ever-shifting goal. Her mother's approval, much like the food she prepared, was a source of both intense comfort and deep anxiety. This complex relationship, this constant push and pull of love and conflict, care and criticism, was all contained within the meals they shared. It was a language they both understood intimately, even, and perhaps especially, when they couldn't understand each other's words or actions. This language of food was more than just their personal code, it was Michelle's primary and sometimes only connection to her Korean heritage. Growing up as one of the only Asian kids in a small, predominantly white town in Oregon, she often felt like a tourist in her own culture. She didn't speak the language fluently, she felt awkward and out of place during family gatherings in Seoul, unable to keep up with the rapid-fire conversations, missing the nuance of the jokes. Her Koreanness felt like a fragile, secret part of her, a side of her identity that only truly came alive in the presence of her mother. And the epicenter of that world, the embassy of her mother's Korea in America, was H Mart, the sprawling, brightly lit, and wonderfully chaotic Korean-American supermarket chain. Trips to H Mart with her mom were not just grocery runs, they were sacred pilgrimages. It was a sanctuary, a place where she could see other people who looked like her, hear her mother's native tongue spoken all around her, and be surrounded by the comforting, familiar sights, sounds, and smells of a culture she desperately wanted to claim as her own. She describes it as a place where you could be unapologetically Korean. Walking through the aisles, her mother was in her element. She would teach Michelle the names of the vegetables, the different cuts of meat for various stews, the right brand of fish sauce to buy, the specific type of noodle for japchae. These were more than cooking lessons, they were lessons in how to be Korean. It was a transfer of cultural knowledge, of heritage. For Michelle, her mother was the gatekeeper to this entire side of her identity. She held the knowledge, the recipes, the stories, the language. And a quiet, terrifying fear began to grow in Michelle's heart, a fear she barely dared to acknowledge. If she ever lost her mother, Would she lose that part of herself too? Would her connection to her heritage be severed forever? That unspoken fear becomes a brutal, terrifying reality when her mother is diagnosed with an aggressive form of pancreatic cancer. Michelle, who had been living across the country in Philadelphia, trying to make it with her indie rock band, Japanese Breakfast, drops everything. She moves back home to the Oregon woods to become her mother's primary caregiver. This section of the memoir is a raw, unflinching, and deeply honest look at the physical and emotional toll of caregiving. The dynamic of their difficult relationship completely flips. The once powerful, critical, and invincible mother becomes fragile, weak, and utterly dependent. The once rebellious, distant daughter becomes the responsible, nurturing adult, tasked with the most intimate and heartbreaking duties. In the process of caring for her mother's ailing body, managing her complex medications, her doctor's appointments, her constant pain, her failing appetite, Michelle finds a new, desperate kind of intimacy with her. The old conflicts and resentments melt away in the face of this new, terrifying reality. All that is left is a primal need to comfort and to save. And she turns to the only language they both truly, deeply know: food. She becomes obsessed with cooking for her mother, believing on some magical level that if she can just replicate the flavors of her mother's own cooking, the taste of her mother's childhood in Korea, she can somehow heal her. She scours the internet and calls her aunt and soul for recipes, trying to recreate dishes like fermented soybean stew, pine nut porridge, or hand-pulled noodles. Each meal becomes a prayer, a desperate offering, a test of her love. She's not just trying to feed her mother's body, she's trying to nourish her soul, to tempt her back to life. She's trying to say, "I love you," in the most powerful way she knows how, repaying a lifetime of meals with a final, heartbreaking feast. But the cancer is relentless, and it's a battle that food, and even the fiercest love, cannot win. After her mother's death, Michelle is adrift in a sea of grief that is both vast and specific. And it's in the aisles of H Mart that the title of the book comes to life. Weeks after the funeral, she finds herself walking into the familiar supermarket, and suddenly, she is overwhelmed. She sees an older Korean woman scolding her daughter. She sees a brand of noodles her mother used to buy. She sees a family sharing a meal in the food court, and she breaks down, weeping uncontrollably. But H Mart is not a place of pure sadness. It becomes her sanctuary. It is the only place in the world where she feels close to her mother. It's a living museum of their relationship. Every jar of gochujang, every bag of rice, every brand of seaweed is a specific memory. It's a place where her grief is not just allowed but implicitly understood. Surrounded by other Korean women, by the language and the food of her mother, she feels she has permission to cry for the one she lost. Crying in H Mart becomes a ritual of remembrance. This is the beautiful, universal wisdom of the book. We all have our own H Marts. It might be a garage full of our father's old tools, a jewelry box containing our grandmother's favorite earrings, or a recipe box full of handwritten cards. These are our memory palaces. Michelle's journey to learn how to cook her mother's most treasured recipes, like kimchi, becomes a way of keeping her mother's spirit alive. It's a difficult, messy process. Her first attempts are failures. But with each attempt, she gets closer. By performing the ritual, by recreating the flavors, she is keeping her heritage and her mother's love alive inside her. She is ensuring that the language they shared will never be forgotten. The book is a heartbreaking but ultimately hopeful story about how we find our loved ones again, not in some distant afterlife, but here, now, in the simple sensory details of the world they left behind. If you believe that our most profound truths are found in our everyday lives, in the meals we share, and in the memories we carry, then you're in the right place. This is the human experience we love to explore. Welcome to Geeky Philosopher. Subscribe and join us for more stories that feed the soul.